My sister's fiancé said I couldn't afford their lifestyle. He didn't know I'd just paid off my $3 million house in cash. Garrett Whitmore said it at my parents' 60th anniversary party, his voice cutting through the champagne-fueled chatter like a blade through silk. I mean, let's be realistic, Alex. Our lives are just on different trajectories now. You're doing your teacher thing, which is noble, but Melissa and I have certain standards. We can't exactly invite you to the Hamptons when you're budgeting for a studio apartment. He laughed. That particular laugh wealthy people use when they want everyone to know they're being generous by acknowledging your existence. My sister Melissa's hand found his arm, her grip tightening. Across the white linen tablecloth, my mother's champagne flute paused halfway to her lips. My father, mid-conversation with his brother, went still, and I sat there, my phone heavy in my jacket pocket with the email I'd received 11 hours earlier. Subject line, final wire transfer confirmation. Property settlement complete. Amount, $3,147,000. The payment had cleared at 8:30 that morning. By 9, my real estate attorney Olivia Chen had called to congratulate me. By 10, I'd met with Douglas Renfield, the wealth management advisor Olivia had recommended for exactly this situation. And now, at 7 in the evening, I was sitting at the country club my parents had rented for their anniversary celebration, listening to my future brother-in-law explain why I wasn't successful enough to exist in his orbit. I'd been teaching high school mathematics for 9 years, a career choice that had surprised my family when I'd turned down a lucrative position at a quantitative trading firm straight out of MIT. My parents, Robert and Catherine Hayes, had built a comfortable life through hard work and careful planning. Dad owned a small accounting firm in Westchester. Mom had been a nurse before retiring 5 years ago. They'd raised Melissa and me in a modest 4-bedroom colonial in Scarsdale, emphasizing education and responsibility over material excess. Melissa, 3 years younger than me, had followed a more conventional path to success. She'd gone to Cornell, studied economics, landed a job at Goldman Sachs, and worked her way up to vice president by age 31. She made around $300,000 a year, lived in a high-rise apartment in Tribeca, and had met Garrett at a charity gala 18 months ago. Garrett was everything my parents had probably hoped I'd become. Ambitious, wealthy, connected. He was 36, a managing director at a private equity firm, and according to Melissa, he made somewhere in the range of $2 million annually. He drove a Porsche 911, wore Patek Philippe watches, and belonged to clubs that required 5-figure annual memberships. He was also, I'd discovered over the past 18 months, a complete asshole. The first time I'd met Garrett had been at a family dinner Melissa had arranged to introduce him to everyone. That had been 14 months ago, at a steakhouse in Manhattan that served $30 appetizers. Garrett had shown up in a Tom Ford suit, shaken my hand with the grip of someone who'd read too many business books about asserting dominance, and immediately asked what I did for work. I teach calculus and statistics at a public high school in Brooklyn, I'd said. He'd paused, his expression cycling through confusion to something like pity. Teaching. That's admirable. Really noble work. Must be tough living on that salary in New York, though. I manage, I'd said. What do you drive? He'd asked, and I should have known then what kind of person he was. A Subaru Outback, 2019. Practical, he'd said, in a tone that made practical sound like a euphemism for failure. The dinner had continued in that vein, with Garrett dominating conversation about his latest deal, his recent ski trip to Aspen, the watch he was considering purchasing for $28,000. Melissa had been quieter than usual, and I'd noticed her watching him with an expression I couldn't quite read, somewhere between pride and anxiety. Over the following months, the pattern had continued. Every family gathering became an opportunity for Garrett to remind everyone, especially me, of the vast gulf between his success and my modest teacher's existence. At Thanksgiving, he'd talked about the apartment he and Melissa were considering purchasing in the West Village, a 3-bedroom for $2.4 million. You probably can't even imagine that kind of price tag, he'd said to me over turkey. In your world, that's like a lottery win. I can imagine it, I'd said quietly. But imagining and affording are different things, right? He'd pressed. I mean, teachers make what? 60,000? 70? That's barely enough for rent in this city. I do fine, I'd said, and changed the subject. At Christmas, he'd gifted my parents an expensive bottle of wine from his collection and made a point of explaining its provenance and value. Then he'd turned to me and said, I got you something practical, handing me a gift card to Target. Figured teachers could use help with classroom supplies. The insult had been so perfectly calibrated that I'd actually admired the craftsmanship. He'd managed to demean both my profession and my financial situation while maintaining plausible deniability under the guise of thoughtfulness. Melissa had looked mortified, but she hadn't said anything. If you are enjoying this story already, please subscribe to see more stories like this. What Garrett didn't know, what nobody in my family knew except my accountant and my lawyers, was that I'd been building wealth quietly and deliberately for the past 9 years. Teaching was my passion, not my financial strategy. The real money had come from something else entirely. Real estate development in emerging Brooklyn neighborhoods. I'd started small in 2015, buying a rundown brownstone in Bed-Stuy for $350,000 with money I'd saved from my brief stint at the trading firm, plus a mortgage. I'd renovated it myself on weekends and summers, learning construction from YouTube videos and manual labor from necessity. I'd sold it 2 years later for $800,000. I'd taken that profit, added another mortgage, and bought 2 properties in Crown Heights, renovated them both, sold them for a combined $1.6 million. The pattern had continued, each cycle building on the last, each property carefully chosen in neighborhoods I researched obsessively, each renovation completed with meticulous attention to detail and cost control. By 2020, I owned 4 properties in Brooklyn. By 2022, I owned 7. I'd kept my teaching job because I loved it, because the students deserved someone who cared about mathematics education, and because having a stable W-2 income made mortgage applications easier. But the real breakthrough had come 2 years ago, when I'd purchased a large plot of land in Bushwick, with plans to develop a mixed-use building, ground-floor retail, with residential units above. The project had required partnering with an architect named Felix Moreno and a construction firm run by a woman named Laura Desmond. The budget had been ambitious, the timeline aggressive, the risk substantial. I'd leveraged everything I owned to make it happen, taking out a construction loan for $2.8 million and putting up my existing properties as collateral. For 18 months, I'd lived with the constant anxiety that something would go wrong, that the market would shift, that costs would overrun, that I'd lose everything. The building had been completed last fall. All 6 residential units had sold within 3 months, and the retail spaces had leased immediately to a coffee shop and a boutique fitness studio. The total revenue from sales and the capitalized value of the retail leases had come to just over $6 million. After paying off the construction loan, closing costs, capital gains taxes, and all other expenses, I'd cleared $3.2 million in profit. I'd taken that money and done something most people in my situation wouldn't do. I'd paid cash for a house. The property was in Park Slope, a neighborhood I'd been watching for years. It was a fully renovated 4-story brownstone with original details, modern systems, a finished basement, and a garden. Listed price, $3.1 million. I'd offered $3 million flat cash, close in 30 days. The sellers had accepted. The closing had happened yesterday morning at the law offices of Olivia Chen, the real estate attorney who'd handled all my transactions for the past 4 years. Olivia was 43, Harvard Law, specialized in high-value New York real estate, and had a reputation for being meticulous to the point of obsession. She'd reviewed every document, every inspection report, every title search with the care of a surgeon examining an MRI. "This is a significant asset, Alex," she'd said, as we'd signed the final documents. "You're now the outright owner of a $3 million property with no mortgage, no liens, no encumbrances. At your age, that's extraordinary." I'd asked about next steps, about asset protection and tax strategy. She'd recommended I speak with Douglas Renfield, a wealth manager who specialized in helping people who'd come into sudden wealth make intelligent long-term decisions. I'd met with Douglas that same morning at his office in Midtown, a sleek space on the 42nd floor with views of Central Park. Douglas was in his mid-50s, calm and precise, the kind of person who explained estate planning the way a professor explains a proof. "You have a $3 million asset generating zero income," he'd said after I'd walked him through my situation. "You also have approximately $400,000 in liquid savings, minimal debt, and a stable $68,000 annual income from teaching. You're in a unique position. What would you recommend?" I'd asked. "First, don't tell anyone about the house until you're ready to deal with the social implications," Douglas had said. "Wealth changes relationships. People will treat you differently. Give yourself time to process this before that happens." "My family doesn't know," I'd said. "Good. Keep it that way until you have a plan for how you want to live. Do you plan to move into the brownstone?" "Eventually. I'm finishing the school year in my current rental. I was thinking of moving in over the summer." "Sensible. In the meantime, we should discuss investment strategy for your liquid assets, estate planning given the size of your real estate holdings, and tax optimization for future development projects if you plan to continue." We'd talked for 90 minutes, mapping out a comprehensive financial plan that included diversified investments, a trust structure to protect assets, and a strategy for continuing real estate development on a smaller, less risky scale. When I'd left Douglas's office, I'd felt a profound sense of calm. The house was real, the wealth was real, and nobody needed to know until I decided to tell them. That had been the plan. Lay low, finish the school year, move into the brownstone quietly over the summer, and eventually tell my family when the time felt right. Then Melissa had called 2 weeks ago to remind me about our parents' anniversary party. "It's at the country club," she'd said. "Garrett's helping organize it. He wants to make it special." "That's nice of him," I'd said, though I'd suspected his motivations were less about honoring my parents and more about having another opportunity to display his wealth and generosity. "He's paying for the venue and the catering," Melissa had continued. "He insisted. You know how he is. He wants to do something big. Mom and Dad will appreciate it." "Alex," Melissa had said, her voice dropping, "can I ask you something?" "Sure. Are you okay? Like, financially? I know teaching doesn't pay much, and I worry about you sometimes. If you ever need help, you know Garrett and I could—" "I'm fine, Mel," I'd interrupted. "I promise. I'm more than fine. Okay, it's just, Garrett sometimes says things, and I don't want you to feel like we're judging you or anything. What kind of things? Just that you're probably struggling, that it must be hard making ends meet in New York on a teacher's salary. He means well. He wants to help. I'd let it go because confronting Melissa about her fiancé's condescension over the phone had seemed pointless, but I'd felt the anger building. The same anger I'd been swallowing for 18 months every time Garrett had made a comment about my car, my clothes, my career, my life. Now, sitting at the anniversary party, listening to him explain why I couldn't afford their lifestyle, I felt that anger crystallize into something cold and clear. Garrett was still talking, explaining to the table about the Hamptons house he and Melissa were renting for the summer, about the cost, about how exclusive the area was. It's just not realistic to invite everyone, he was saying. The house only has 4 bedrooms, and with Melissa's friends from work and my colleagues, we're pretty much at capacity. Plus, Alex, you'd probably feel out of place. It's a lot of networking, high-level conversations about markets and investments. Not really your world. My mother had set down her champagne flute. Garrett, I don't think... It's okay, Mom, I'd said quietly. Then I'd turned to Garrett. Can I ask you something? Sure, buddy, he'd said. And the condescension in that buddy made my jaw tighten. You said I can't afford your lifestyle. What makes you think you know anything about my finances? Garrett had laughed. Come on, Alex. You're a public school teacher. I'm not trying to be rude, but it's public information what that pays. You make what, 70,000? Maybe 80 with summer school? That's great for what you do, but it's not Hampton's money. It's not even really Manhattan money. You're right that teaching doesn't pay much, I'd said. So what else do you do? Tutoring? That might get you another 10, 15,000 a year. Still not enough to run in our circles. The table had gone quiet. My father was watching me with an expression I couldn't read. Melissa looked like she wanted to disappear. I invest in real estate, I'd said simply. Garrett had grinned. Real estate? Okay. Like, you bought a condo somewhere? Like, I've been developing properties in Brooklyn for 9 years. The grin had faltered slightly. Developing? You mean flipping houses? I mean purchasing undervalued properties, renovating them, and either selling them at market value or holding them as rentals. I also recently completed a ground-up mixed-use development in Bushwick. Garrett's expression had shifted, uncertainty creeping in. How recently? Finished last fall. Sold all 6 residential units and leased the retail space by December. What kind of revenue did that generate? Garrett had asked, and I could hear the challenge in his voice. Just over $6 million in gross revenue. About $3.2 million in net profit after all expenses. The silence that followed was absolute. Garrett had stared at me. Melissa's mouth had opened slightly. My mother had gripped my father's hand. $3 million, Garrett had repeated slowly. You made $3 million on one project. One project, I'd confirmed. I've completed 11 projects over the past 9 years. Total career profit is around $8 million, though a significant portion of that was reinvested into subsequent projects. Garrett's face had cycled through several expressions: disbelief, confusion, and finally something that looked like anger. You're telling me you have $8 million. I'm telling you I've made $8 million in real estate profits over 9 years. The actual number I have available now is different because I've been using capital for new acquisitions, and I paid a lot in taxes. But you're a teacher, Garrett had said, as if that fact disproved everything I just said. I teach because I enjoy it. The real estate is how I build wealth. Why didn't anyone know about this? Melissa had asked, her voice small. Because I don't need people to know, I'd said. I like my privacy. I like my work. I don't need validation from anyone about my choices. Garrett had leaned back in his chair, processing. Then he'd said, So what do you own? What properties do you currently hold? Currently? I sold most of my portfolio to fund the Bushwick development. Now I own one property. What kind of property? A brownstone in Park Slope. 4 stories, fully renovated, original details. I closed on it yesterday. What did you pay? Garrett had asked, and there was something desperate in the question, like he needed to find a way to reestablish the hierarchy. $3 million. Cash. No mortgage. The words had landed like a grenade. Melissa had made a sound, something between a gasp and a laugh. My mother had actually stood up, her hand over her mouth. My father had been grinning, and Garrett had gone very, very still. You paid $3 million in cash, he'd said slowly. Yesterday morning. Closed at the law offices of Olivia Chen. She's a real estate attorney in Manhattan. Specializes in high-value transactions. I'd pulled out my phone, opened my email, found the message from Olivia with the closing statement attached. I'd turned the phone toward Garrett. That's the settlement statement. You can see the purchase price, the closing costs, and the confirmation that the payment was made in full via wire transfer. Garrett had picked up my phone, his hands unsteady. He'd read the document, his eyes moving line by line. Melissa had leaned over to look, her expression shifting from shock to something I couldn't identify. This is real, Garrett had said. It's real, I'd confirmed. You're a millionaire. I'm a teacher who invests in real estate, I'd corrected. The wealth is secondary to the work I care about. Garrett had set down the phone. His face had flushed, embarrassment coloring his cheeks. Why didn't you say something? All this time you let you think what? I'd interrupted. That I was poor? That I was struggling? You made those assumptions, Garrett. I never confirmed them. But you didn't correct them either. Why would I? Your opinion of my financial situation was never my responsibility to manage. You decided who I was based on my job title and my car. That's your problem, not mine. The table had been silent. Other guests at nearby tables had started to notice the tension, conversations pausing as people glanced over. My mother had sat back down, her hand still gripping my father's. Dad had been watching Garrett with an expression of barely concealed satisfaction. Melissa had been staring at me like she was seeing me for the first time. I owe you an apology, Garrett had finally said, his voice tight. You don't owe me anything, I'd said. You made assumptions. You acted on those assumptions. That's between you and your conscience. I was trying to be helpful, Garrett had protested, offering advice, offering to help you get ahead. I didn't need your advice or your help, I'd said. I needed you to treat me with basic respect. But you couldn't do that because in your worldview, a teacher can't possibly be successful. You needed me to be less than you to feel good about yourself. That's not true, isn't it? Every family gathering, every conversation, you found a way to remind me that I'm not in your league. The comments about my car, my apartment, my salary, the gift card to Target for Christmas, the constant suggestions that I need your connections or your guidance. All of it was designed to keep me in my place. Garrett had stood up abruptly. I need some air. He'd walked away from the table, heading toward the doors that led to the country club's terrace. Melissa had watched him go, then turned to me. Alex, I didn't know about any of this. Why didn't you tell me? Because it didn't matter, I'd said. I'm happy with my life. I don't need anyone to know how much money I have. But Garrett's been horrible to you. If I'd known, I would have stopped him. Would you? I'd asked gently. Or would you have defended him because it's easier than confronting how he treats people? Melissa had flinched. That's not fair. Maybe not. But Mel, this isn't just about money. It's about how he views the world. He thinks worth is measured in salary and status. He thinks teachers are noble failures. He thinks anyone who drives a Subaru and lives modestly is someone to be pitied. That's who he is. He's under a lot of pressure at work, Melissa had said, and I could hear her grasping for excuses. He's trying to prove himself. That's not your job to fix, I'd said. And it's not an excuse for treating people like they're beneath him. My father had spoken up then, his voice calm but firm. Melissa, your brother is right. Garrett's behavior tonight was unacceptable. It's been unacceptable for months. We've all noticed it, but we've been too polite to say anything. He's a good person, Melissa had said, but her voice had lacked conviction. Maybe he is, Mom had said. But tonight he wasn't kind, and kindness matters more than success. Melissa had stood up, her face flushed. I need to go talk to him. She'd followed Garrett outside, leaving me with my parents and the weight of what had just happened. If this story keeps your interest, please subscribe to get more stories like this. Dad had reached across the table and gripped my shoulder. I'm proud of you, son. Not for the money, for building something meaningful while staying true to what you care about. Thanks, Dad. $3 million, Mom had said, shaking her head. In cash. Alex, that's extraordinary. It's the result of 9 years of careful planning and a lot of luck with timing, I'd said. But I don't want it to change anything. I'm still teaching. I'm still the same person. Are you going to move into the brownstone? Dad had asked. Over the summer. I'm finishing the school year in my current place. You could rent it out, Mom had suggested. Build passive income. I've thought about it. Right now, I just want to live in it. Enjoy the space. Maybe eventually I'll convert the top floor into a rental unit. But for now, I want it to be mine. We'd talked for a few more minutes before Melissa had returned, her eyes red. Garrett hadn't come back with her. He left, she'd said quietly. Said he needed time to think. He took an Uber home. Are you okay? I'd asked. I don't know, Melissa had admitted. She'd sat down heavily. He's embarrassed, humiliated. He kept saying he made assumptions and he was wrong and he doesn't know how to face everyone now. He could start with an apology, Dad had said. He tried. Alex didn't accept it. Because it wasn't sincere, I'd said. He's sorry he was wrong, not sorry for how he treated me. There's a difference. Melissa had been quiet for a long moment. Then she'd said, this isn't the first time, is it, that he's done something like this? Define like this, I'd said. Made someone feel small because they didn't meet his standards. No, I'd said. It's not the first time. I've watched him do it to waiters, to Uber drivers, to anyone he perceives as beneath him. I just happen to be convenient because I'm family, and I'm around often enough that he could make it a recurring theme. Why didn't you say something? I did. You just didn't want to hear it. Melissa had looked down at her hands. I think I need to reconsider some things. That's between you and him, I'd said. But Mel, you deserve someone who builds you up without tearing other people down. Wealth and success are fine, but they're not replacements for character. The party had continued, though the atmosphere had shifted. People had congratulated my parents, toasted to their 60 years together, shared stories and laughter. Garrett hadn't returned. Melissa had stayed, putting on a brave face, but I could see the cracks forming. When the evening had ended around 10, I'd said goodbye to my parents with long hugs and promises to visit soon. Melissa had walked me to my car, her arms wrapped around herself despite the warm May evening. Alex, I'm sorry for not seeing it sooner, for not standing up for you. You don't need to apologize for his behavior, I'd said. But I let it happen. I made excuses. I told myself he was just competitive, or that he didn't mean it the way it sounded. That's not on you. It feels like it is, she'd said. Then, after a pause, can I see it? The brownstone? When I move in, you're welcome anytime. I'd driven home to my rental in Brooklyn, a modest one-bedroom in Crown Heights that I'd been living in for 4 years. Rent was $2,000 a month, well below what I could afford, but it was close to the school where I taught, and I'd never seen the point in upgrading. The apartment was quiet when I'd arrived, just me and the faint sounds of the city through thin walls. I'd sat on my second-hand couch and thought about the evening, about Garrett's face when he'd read the closing statement, about Melissa's apology, about the years I'd spent building wealth in silence while being dismissed as a failure. The next morning, I'd woken to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. Most were from Melissa, a few from my parents, 3 from Garrett. I'd read Melissa's messages first. They'd started apologetic, then questioning, then angry. Why didn't you tell me? How could you let me think you were struggling? Garrett says you set him up, that you wanted to humiliate him. Did you? Is that what this was about? I'd called her. She'd answered on the first ring. Alex, I didn't set him up, Mel. I was planning to tell the family about the brownstone eventually. Garrett forced my hand by making those comments at the party. He's devastated. He barely slept. He keeps saying he's ruined everything. He's embarrassed. That's not the same as being sorry for his behavior. Can you just talk to him, please? He wants to apologize properly. I'd agreed, reluctantly, to meet Garrett for coffee that afternoon at a place near my school. He'd arrived looking worse than I'd ever seen him. Unshaven, rumpled, his usual polish completely absent. We'd ordered coffee and sat at a table in the corner. Thank you for meeting me, he'd said. Melissa asked me to. Right, of course. He'd been quiet for a moment, stirring his coffee without drinking it. Then he'd said, I was completely out of line last night. Everything I said, every assumption I made, it was wrong. I'm sorry. Okay. That's it? Just okay? What do you want me to say, Garrett? You spent 18 months treating me like I was a charity case. You made constant comments about my career, my lifestyle, my worth as a person. Last night, you told a room full of people that I couldn't afford your lifestyle and that I'd feel out of place in your world. An apology doesn't undo that. I know, but I'm trying to own it. I made assumptions based on your job and your car and your apartment, and I was wrong. You're a millionaire, and I'm the idiot who didn't see it. I'm not a millionaire because of the house, I'd said. I'm a millionaire because I spent 9 years building a real estate portfolio while working a job I love. The house is just the most recent result of that work. Still, $3 million in cash. That's incredible. Most people our age don't have that kind of wealth. Most people our age don't work 80-hour weeks for years on construction projects while also teaching full-time, I'd said. I sacrificed a lot to build this. Weekends, summers, social life. I made a choice about what mattered to me. And you never felt the need to tell anyone? Why would I? My financial situation is private. I don't need validation from anyone, especially not from someone who judges worth by salary. Garrett had winced. That's fair. But Alex, I want you to know, it wasn't personal. I grew up poor. My dad was a mechanic. My mom cleaned houses. I worked my ass off to get to where I am, and I guess I developed this need to prove I made it. Anyone who wasn't on the same path felt like a threat to that narrative. That's something you should work on with a therapist, not take out on the people around you. I know. I've actually been thinking about that. Melissa suggested I talk to someone. Good. You should. Do you think you can forgive me? Not right now, but eventually? I'd thought about that. Maybe. If you actually change. If you stop measuring people's worth by their bank accounts and their job titles. If you treat waiters and drivers and teachers and everyone else with the same respect you give your colleagues, then maybe. I'll try. I promise I'll try. We'd finished our coffee in awkward silence, and when we'd parted ways, I'd felt no real sense of resolution. Garrett's apology had been sincere, but it was rooted in the shock of being wrong, not in genuine understanding of why his behavior had been harmful. Over the next few weeks, I'd watched from a distance as Garrett had tried to course correct. He'd shown up to a family dinner at my parents' house without any designer accessories, driving Melissa's practical sedan instead of his Porsche. He'd asked me questions about my teaching, about my students, actually listening instead of waiting to talk about himself. He'd made a visible effort to be less ostentatious, less condescending, less performatively wealthy. But there had been a hollowness to it, like he was playing a role rather than actually changing. Melissa had noticed it too. She'd called me one evening in June, her voice strained. I think I'm going to call off the wedding. What happened? Nothing specific. Everything in general. I've been watching him try to be different, and it just feels fake, like he's performing humility instead of actually being humble. And I keep thinking about what you said, about deserving someone who builds me up without tearing other people down. That's a big decision, Mel. I know. But I can't shake this feeling that I've been making excuses for him because he's successful and good-looking and checks all the boxes I thought mattered. But you spent 9 years quietly building something incredible, and you never needed anyone's approval. That's the kind of integrity I want in a partner. Don't make decisions based on me, I'd said. Make them based on what you need. I am. And I need someone who sees people as people, not as status markers. 3 days later, Melissa had called off the engagement. Garrett had been blindsided, devastated, and angry. He'd called me, drunk, at midnight, accusing me of poisoning Melissa against him. She was fine until you showed up with your $3 million house and your perfect humble teacher act, he'd slurred. She would have married me if you hadn't made me look bad. I didn't make you look bad, Garrett. You did that yourself. Fuck you, Alex. You think you're better than me because you teach kids algebra? You're not. You're just lucky. Maybe, I'd said. But I'm also happy. Are you? He'd hung up. I'd never heard from him again. I'd moved into the brownstone in July, spending my summer setting up the space exactly how I wanted it. The top floor became a library and office. The third floor was my bedroom and a guest room. The second floor was living space. Kitchen, dining room, living room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the garden. The ground floor and basement were flex space, room to expand if I ever needed it. My parents had visited on a weekend in August, walking through each room with expressions of wonder and pride. You built this life, Alex, Dad had said, standing in the garden with a glass of wine. On your own terms. That's rare. I had help. Good lawyers, good contractors, good timing. Don't minimize it, Mom had said. You saw opportunities where other people saw risk. You worked harder than anyone we know. You earned this. Melissa had visited too, alone, bringing wine and Thai food. We'd sat in the garden as the sun set, talking about her new life post-Garrett, about her plans to take a sabbatical and travel, about what she wanted next. I'm proud of you, she'd said, for building all this, for staying true to yourself, for not needing anyone to know how successful you were. Success is subjective, I'd said. I'm successful because I'm doing work I love and I have security. The house is nice, but it's not what makes me successful. Garrett never understood that. He thought success was showing everyone how much you have. A lot of people think that, but you don't. You never did. No, I'd agreed. I never did. When school started again in September, I'd returned to my classroom at the public high school in Brooklyn, teaching calculus to juniors and statistics to seniors. My students didn't know I owned a $3 million brownstone. My colleagues didn't know I'd made $8 million in real estate over 9 years. I was just Mr. Hayes, the math teacher who explained derivatives with patience and brought donuts on test days. One afternoon in October, I'd been working on lesson plans when my principal, Janice Wu, had knocked on my classroom door. Alex, can I talk to you for a minute? Of course. She'd come in and close the door. I wanted to let you know, there's been some talk among the staff about you. My stomach had dropped. What kind of talk? Apparently someone saw you at an open house in Park Slope over the summer and recognized you. Then someone else mentioned seeing you at a real estate development conference. People are asking questions. About what? About whether you do real estate development on the side. About whether you own properties. I'm not asking you to confirm or deny anything. I just wanted to give you a heads up that people are curious. I appreciate that, Janice. For what it's worth, what you do outside school is your business. As long as it doesn't interfere with your teaching, which it clearly hasn't. I don't care if you're a secret millionaire or a competitive hot dog eater. I'd laughed. I'll keep that in mind. That said, if you ever decide to leave teaching to focus on real estate full-time, please give me at least a semester's notice. You're one of the best math teachers we have, and replacing you would be a nightmare. I'm not going anywhere, I'd said. Teaching is where I want to be. And I'd meant it. The brownstone, the wealth, the success in real estate, all of it was secondary to the work I cared about, helping students understand mathematics, showing them that numbers could be beautiful, that logic could be empowering, that education mattered. That evening, I'd sat in my library on the top floor of the brownstone, looking out at the Brooklyn skyline, and I'd thought about Garrett's question from that night at the anniversary party. Why didn't anyone know about this? The answer was simple. Because my worth wasn't tied to other people's knowledge of my success. I didn't need Garrett or Melissa or anyone else to know I was wealthy. I didn't need validation or recognition or status. I needed work that mattered, students who benefited from my teaching, and the quiet satisfaction of building something valuable. Garrett had measured success by how much people knew about his wealth. I measured it by how much I could do without anyone knowing. And that difference, more than the money or the house or anything else, was what separated us. 6 months later, in March, I'd received an invitation to Melissa's wedding. She'd met someone new, a high school history teacher named Simon Wu, who coached soccer and volunteered at a homeless shelter. They were getting married at a small venue in Westchester, immediate family only. I'd gone, of course, and I'd watched my sister marry someone who made her laugh, who treated waiters with kindness, who didn't measure worth by salary or status. During the reception, Melissa had pulled me aside. Thank you. For what? For showing me what integrity looks like. For not compromising who you are. For being the example I needed when I was making excuses for someone who didn't deserve them. You figured that out on your own, Mel. Maybe, but you made it easier to see. I'd hugged her, and I'd meant it when I'd said I was happy for her. Later that night, driving home to the brownstone in my 7-year-old Subaru, I'd thought about all the assumptions people made based on external markers. The car you drove, the clothes you wore, the job title you held. Garrett had built his entire identity on those markers, and when they'd failed to intimidate me, he'd crumbled. I'd built my identity on work I loved and values I held, And when the wealth had come, it had been a byproduct, not the point. The brownstone was beautiful. The bank account was comfortable. The real estate portfolio I'd sold off had generated more money than most people saw in a lifetime. But none of it mattered as much as the message I'd written on the whiteboard in my classroom that morning. Mathematics is the language of truth. Learn it, and you'll never be fooled by appearances. Garrett had been fooled by appearances for 18 months, convinced that a teacher couldn't possibly be successful. He'd learned the truth in the most humiliating way possible, in front of my family, at a celebration meant to honor 60 years of marriage, when I'd shown him proof that I owned outright what he could only aspire to afford. That moment had cost him his relationship with Melissa, his standing in our family, and his comfortable narrative about who deserved respect. And I'd delivered it with nothing more than the truth. No malice, no revenge, just reality. He'd said I couldn't afford his lifestyle. He'd been wrong, and that was justice enough. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.